The investigation into the death of a former Nickelodeon star continues in Brownsville tonight. News 12's Shakti Dennis joining us now with the latest details.
If you grew up on early 2000s Nickelodeon, there are faces you remember even when the names slip your mind. Kianna Underwood was one of them. She made us laugh on All That, voiced Little Bill for years, and toured Broadway before most kids knew what a career even was. Now, at just 33, her life ended in a Brooklyn hit and run. No arrests, way too many questions. So how does a Nickelodeon kid end up here? This isn't just another celebrity tragedy. This is about what happens when the cameras stop rolling, when the residual checks stop coming, and when the industry that once celebrated you moves on without looking back. This is about a system that profits from childhood dreams and then vanishes when those kids need support the most. A kid who was working. Kianna Underwood wasn't a background extra or a one-episode wonder. This starlet was consistently booked. Born November 28, 1992, she began voicing Fuchsia Glover on Little Bill in 1999 and stayed with the show for 5 years, appearing in 23 episodes. That's steady work on a major network, not a fluke. Voice acting requires discipline, timing, and professionalism, especially at that age. Think about what that means. While most 7-year-olds were learning multiplication tables, Kianna was in recording booths, taking direction from adult professionals, hitting marks, nailing timing, and delivering performances that would air to millions. She wasn't playing dress-up. She was working a real job with real expectations. Little Bill wasn't some obscure cable show either. It was a Bill Cosby production on Nickelodeon, running during the network's golden era. Kids across America knew that show. They grew up with those characters, and Kianna was part of that fabric, part of what made childhood feel complete for a whole generation. Then came All That. Between 2004 and 2005, Kianna appeared in 7 episodes during a transitional era of the show. She shared the screen with future comedy heavyweights like Amanda Bynes, Nick Cannon, and Kenan Thompson. Names that would go on to dominate pop culture long after All That wrapped. She earned that spot. All That wasn't easy. It was live sketch comedy for kids, which meant memorizing scripts, executing physical comedy, nailing timing in front of a studio audience, and doing it all while cameras rolled. There were no second takes during live tapings. You had to bring it every time. And Kianna did. Outside Nickelodeon, she worked in film, did additional voice roles, and toured nationally as Little Inez in Hairspray. Stage, TV, film, she was doing it all. Hairspray wasn't community theater. It was a national Broadway tour, one of the most demanding performance environments that exists. 8 shows a week. Travel, rehearsals, costume changes, choreography. She was living the dream that thousands of kids audition for and never achieve. So if she had talent, experience, and momentum, how did her story drift so far off the radar? The Nickelodeon illusion. Here's what we believed back then. We thought those Nickelodeon kids were untouchable. We saw them on our screens every day, and we just assumed they were rich, set for life, protected by some invisible Hollywood safety net that would catch them no matter what. That's what early 2000s Nickelodeon fame looked like from the outside. These weren't just actors. They were icons. They had their faces on lunchboxes, backpacks, posters. They hosted the Kids' Choice Awards. They got slimed. They seemed like they'd won the lottery of childhood. But visibility isn't protection. Fame isn't a safety net. And Nickelodeon in the early 2000s was a content machine that churned through young talent at an impossible pace. New shows, new stars, new faces every season. The network was expanding, programming was everywhere, and kids were the product. We didn't see what happened when those kids aged out. We didn't ask where the All That cast went after the show ended. We didn't wonder what happened to the voice actors when their shows got canceled. We just moved on to the next generation of Nickelodeon stars and assumed everyone from before was fine. They weren't fine. Many of them struggled, some publicly, most privately. But we weren't paying attention anymore. We'd already moved on. That's the illusion Kianna was working under. The belief that if you were good enough, talented enough, professional enough, the industry would reward that. The belief that child stardom was a stepping stone to something bigger, not a cliff you could fall off. So when the cameras did turn off, when the roles dried up, when the industry moved on to younger faces, Kianna was left with a resume that looked impressive on paper, but didn't translate to the real world. And that's where this story gets uncomfortable. When the cameras turn off, this is the part that makes people uncomfortable. Child stardom doesn't come with a manual for adulthood. And for many former child actors, the transition is brutal. Roles dry up, auditions slow down, and the phone stops ringing. Kianna's on-screen credits gradually faded, and her life moved out of the public eye. By the time of her death, police confirmed she was experiencing homelessness. You should let that land. A former Nickelodeon and Broadway performer, homeless at 33. This wasn't rumor or internet speculation. It came directly from authorities. And it forces a bigger conversation about what happens when child stars grow up without a safety net. Where were the royalties? Where were the savings? Where was the support system that should have been built around a child who was generating revenue for major corporations? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the questions that need answers. Because here's the thing. When Kianna was working, she made people money. Networks profited. Production companies profited. Agents took their percentages. Everyone got paid. But when she needed help decades later, where was that infrastructure? If the industry moves on so easily, what happens to the people it leaves behind? What happens when your childhood resume doesn't translate? Let's talk about something nobody prepares child actors for. What do you put on a job application when your work experience is voicing cartoons and performing sketch comedy? Kianna had years of professional experience. Real work. Consistent bookings. She'd been employed since she was 7 years old. But try explaining that to a hiring manager at a regular job. You walk into an interview and your resume says, "Little Bill and all that." The person across from you either doesn't recognize it, doesn't take it seriously, or assumes you're overqualified for whatever entry-level position you're applying for. You're too famous to be normal, but not famous enough to still be working in entertainment? There's no college pipeline for former child actors. Most of them didn't have time for traditional schooling. They had on-set tutors, sure, but that's not the same as going to high school, making friends, learning how to navigate normal teenage life. They missed proms and football games and all the social development that happens when you're not working 12-hour days on a soundstage. So when the acting work stops, you're left with no degree, no traditional work experience, and no network outside of an industry that's already forgotten you. You're starting from scratch in your 20s or 30s, while everyone else your age has been building their career for years. And then there's the psychological piece. Your entire identity was built around being a performer. That's who you were. That's what made you special. When that's gone, who are you? Just another person trying to make rent. Except you're doing it without the skills or experience that most people your age already have. So what options do you have? Go back to school and start over. But with what money? Try to restart your acting career, but you're competing with younger talent and you haven't booked anything in years? move back in with family if you have family willing to support you, or you slip through the cracks. You end up couch surfing, then in shelters, then on the streets. And nobody notices because you're not famous anymore. You're just another person experiencing homelessness in a city that has thousands of them. That's what happened to Kianna. Not because she was lazy or untalented or didn't try hard enough, but because the system that profited from her childhood offered her nothing when she needed it most. The morning everything changed. On January 16, 2026, just before 7 a.m., police responded to a 911 call near Pitkin Avenue and Mother Gaston Boulevard in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Surveillance footage shows Kianna waiting briefly at the intersection before crossing against the pedestrian signal. A gray or black Ford Explorer struck her, and she was dragged about 2 blocks before coming free. While she was still in the roadway, a second vehicle, described as a black and gray sedan, hit her. Both drivers fled. No one stopped. No one stayed or called for help. Kianna was pronounced dead at the scene from severe injuries to her head and body. Authorities confirmed surveillance video captured the sequence, and as of the latest updates, no arrests have been made. But as details emerged, public reaction shifted from shock to something much darker. Why's the details that hit harder? People ask the same questions. How does someone not realize what's happening? How does a second driver see someone in the road and keep going? How does no one stop? Then came the most painful detail of all. Kianna was alone. No family with her. No one advocating for her in that moment. No one to speak for her until after it was already too late. It wasn't just a traffic incident anymore. It became a story about isolation, invisibility, and how someone once so visible could disappear so completely. And that's when the conversation turned toward the industry itself. Why this case feels different. This isn't the first former child star to die tragically. It won't be the last. But something about Kianna's story made people stop scrolling. Maybe it was the hit-and-run detail, the image of 2 drivers fleeing the scene, the callousness of leaving someone in the street. That's the kind of detail that sticks with you, that makes you feel sick. But I think it was something deeper. It was the homelessness, that specific detail that shattered the fantasy we'd been holding on to. Because we tell ourselves stories about child stars. We know some of them struggle. We know some of them have addiction issues or mental health crises or public breakdowns. But we tell ourselves those are the exceptions, the outliers, the ones who couldn't handle fame or made bad choices or didn't have good people around them. Kianna's story doesn't fit that narrative. By all accounts, she was talented, professional, and hardworking. She wasn't tabloid fodder. She didn't have scandalous stories following her. She just quietly faded from view. And then she was gone. And that's what disturbed people. Because if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. All those kids we grew up watching, all those faces we loved, all those performers who made our childhoods brighter, they could all be one bad break away from the same fate. This is the part that made it stop being distant. This is when people started asking uncomfortable questions about the shows they loved, the networks they supported, the nostalgia they'd been indulging in without thinking about the cost. Kianna's loneliness in death forced people to confront how disposable these child performers really are. How quickly the industry moves on. How little protection exists for kids who give their childhood to entertainment. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't watch old Nickelodeon clips the same way. You can't enjoy the nostalgia without wondering what happened to everyone else in the cast. You can't separate the entertainment from the human cost anymore. That's why this case feels different. It's not just sad, it's revealing. It pulls back the curtain on a system we'd rather not examine too closely. Industry, silence, and side-eye. After her death, tributes poured in. Old clips resurfaced. Fans remembered her face, her voice, her presence. Nostalgia did what it always does. But some former industry voices didn't just mourn. They questioned, where was the support? Who checks on child stars when they grow up? Why does the industry celebrate kids when they're profitable and forget them when they're not? This wasn't about pointing fingers at one network. It was about a system that benefits from childhood labor without providing long-term protection. Kianna's death reopened a conversation Hollywood tends to avoid. We've seen this pattern before. Here's what makes this even more frustrating. This isn't new information. Former child actors have been speaking out for years about the lack of support, the financial exploitation, the psychological toll. They've been telling these stories in interviews, in memoirs, on podcasts, anywhere people will listen. We've seen the pattern play out over and over. Child star rises. Child star ages out. Child star struggles. Sometimes publicly with addiction or legal issues, sometimes privately, slipping into obscurity until something tragic happens and we all pretend to be shocked. And every time, there's a brief moment of collective concern. Think pieces get written. People tweet their condolences. There are calls for better protections, better support systems, better oversight. And then, nothing changes. The industry waits for the attention to fade, which it always does, and then goes right back to employing children without providing any long-term protection. Because why would they change? There's no incentive. Child actors are profitable. They're easy to replace, and by the time the consequences show up, everyone's moved on to the next generation. What's different this time is that people are starting to recognize the pattern. They're connecting the dots between different stories, different tragedies, different failures. They're realizing this isn't about individual bad luck or poor choices. It's systemic, and systemic problems require systemic solutions. Not just sympathy, not just tributes, actual policy changes, actual protections, actual accountability. But here's the thing about accountability. The industry only accepts it when they're forced to, when public pressure becomes too loud to ignore, when staying silent becomes more expensive than making changes. So the question becomes, will the pressure last long enough this time? Or will we all move on in a week and let the cycle continue? Because right now, there are kids working in entertainment who will be in Kianna's position in 15 years if nothing changes. They're on set today, building careers, trusting that the adults around them will protect them. And those adults are failing them, just like they failed Kianna. Where the case stands. As of the most recent reports, the NYPD's Collision Investigation Squad continues searching for the drivers involved. Surveillance footage exists. Vehicle descriptions have been released. Investigators are still asking the public for information, but no suspects have been publicly identified. For Kianna's family and those who remember her, the lack of answers only deepens the loss. And that leaves us with the final question. How should Kianna Underwood actually be remembered? Why remembering her matters? The internet moves fast. Attention spans are short. We're already seeing Kianna's story fade from social media feeds, replaced by the next tragedy, the next controversy, the next viral moment. And that's the danger. Because if we only remember Kianna for the 2 weeks her death was trending, then nothing changes. If we don't hold on to the uncomfortable questions her story raised, then we're just consuming tragedy as content. Remembrance without change is empty. It's performative. It's the digital equivalent of thoughts and prayers. Nice sentiment that accomplishes nothing. So why does remembering Kianna matter? Because her story is still happening, right now, to other former child actors who are struggling in silence, to current child actors who will be in the same position in a decade if the system doesn't change. Remembering her matters because it forces us to confront our own complicity. We consumed the content she created. We loved the shows she was on. We benefited from her work as children. And then we forgot about her, just like the industry did. If we're going to remember her, we need to remember all of it, not just the tragedy, but the systemic failures that led to it. Not just the nostalgia for her work, but the cost of creating that work. Not just the shock of how she died, but the anger at how preventable it was. Her story matters because it's a mirror. It shows us what we value and what we ignore. It shows us how easily we forget people once they stop entertaining us. It shows us the human cost of the content we consume without thinking. And if we can't hold on to that discomfort long enough to demand change, then we're part of the problem. A life, not a footnote. Kianna Underwood was not just a tragic headline or a cautionary tale like most child stars tend to be. She was a working child actor, a performer, a voice woven into the childhoods of millions, and a reminder of how quickly visibility can fade when support disappears. Her story isn't just sad, it's revealing. Because nostalgia is easy, but accountability is harder. And if we only remember Kianna for how she died, then we've ignored everything she lived through first. So the real question is this: what will change before another story like hers repeats itself? Kianna Underwood deserved better. She deserved better than homelessness at 33. She deserved better than dying alone on a Brooklyn street. She deserved better than becoming a cautionary tale instead of a success story. And until the industry that profited from her childhood starts taking responsibility for what comes after, her story will keep repeating. Different names, different networks, same tragic ending. That's not acceptable. That cannot be acceptable. Kianna Underwood's story shouldn't just be a headline we scroll past. She was real, a working child actor. And yet, she ended up alone, forgotten, and vulnerable. If her story moved you, hit that like button. Leave a comment sharing your favorite memory of Kianna or what this story made you think about. And subscribe so you don't miss the next video where we dig deeper into the stories behind the faces you grew up with. Remember her, honor her, and let's make sure voices like hers aren't forgotten.